Hi, my name is Greg and I work for the New Client Services Department for Lacerte. The objective of this video is to teach you how to configure the fonts and colors options and the display options. These two options tabs allow you to customize how the program displays the data that you enter into the client file and how the client list appears. A note for those who have a network license, these two tabs are only available in the options. The master options, where the options are set globally for the entire office, do not have these two tabs. Let's open the Options window and take a look at those tabs. Like most functions in the program, opening the Options window can be done several ways: using Settings, and then Options, or by using the Options window on the toolbar, or by pressing Ctrl-O on your keyboard. I'm going to choose Settings and then Options. Next, I'll select the Fonts and Colors tab. I want to point out right away that these options will have no effect on how the forms look. The font and size of font on the form is dictated by the IRS, and we have no options in the program to change how the form is viewed or printed. So this first area gives you options on how the client list appears. You can change the font size and type. On the right hand side is an example of what to expect when you make these changes. Let's change this font to Myriad Arabic. As you can see, the example on the right is now smaller than the default, so I'm going to increase the font size to 14. Let's look at that result now. This is the result of that change, and you can see that it's easy to read. I wanted to call attention to this readability because some of the fonts available in the options are not so easy to read. A word of caution: choosing a font that might be even slightly difficult to read may cause you some eye strain, so I suggest a very simple, easy to read font. To demonstrate that, I'm going to select an example of a font that I do not suggest using. I'm going to use Nueva Standard. Now let's click OK and look at how that looks. This might look pretty at first, but I get a headache just looking at the screen for just a moment. So I'm going to go back into the options, and I'm going to reset this tab back to defaults. Click Yes here to reset the defaults, and then click OK. Now these are back to the default options. And now we're back to something that's simple and easier to see. The next option I'll discuss is the alternate line shading. The alternate line shading lets you highlight every other line on the client list. When I select this button, I'm presented with a color palette. I'm going to select yellow, then click OK here, and then click OK here. As you can see, this makes it easier to look from left to right and keep the client straight as you're looking from left to right. Again, a word of caution here: when selecting this alternate shading, I'd suggest using a pale color like the yellow I selected. If you select a bolder color, it can be more of a distraction. Let's pick a bolder color just to show you what I'm talking about. So now back into the options, and I'll change that color to blue. To me, that's such a stark difference. It really is a distraction to me when I look at that. So that's just an example there. So let's change it back to yellow the way I had it. There we go. So again, that's something I think I could work with. Another thing that I'll mention is that some customers of ours use this alternate line shading to differentiate between what tax year that they're in. I'm going to bring up the 2012 program to show you the difference there. So here's my 2012 Lacerte Tax program, where I've set that alternate line shading to a different color. This makes it easy for me to differentiate between the 2 years of the program. And now back to the 13 program. The next section in the fonts and colors is the interactive input. Interactive input is the term we use for the screens where the data is entered. The same option for changing the fonts is available here, and the same cautions I mentioned earlier apply here as well. This highlight color is used to highlight the field you're on when entering the data. I'm going to click on that, choose yellow, click OK here, and click OK here. Now let's look and see what that does. Let's open a client here, and I'm going to open up the client information screen so you can see wherever the cursor is located, that field now is highlighted in yellow, so you can easily determine, I guess, to see where your cursor is located. So that can be handy. Let's go back to the options. The last 2 buttons in this section can help differentiate how the data got into the client. The user entered data color will be the color of the entries when you manually type them in. I like this default color, so I'm going to stay with that. The imported data color is something I do like to change. Imported data is anything that is imported, and that includes any calculated data that was transferred from the prior year program. The default here is black, but I want to be able to quickly see what was imported, so I'm going to change that to red, and then click OK here and click OK here. And now let's see what that did. Open up a client here and open up the client information screen. So everything that's in blue here is the data that I entered. But I'm going to hop over to the 2013 estimated payment screen. And you can see here that there's entries in here that are in red. Those entries were imported from the prior year program and during that aging process. I did not enter that data. That's why it's showing up in red. So any of the imported data will show up in the client file as being red. The last thing I'll point out in this options window is the defaults button. If you get in here and make some changes and then realize it was better before you made those changes, you can use this default button down here at the bottom. I'll demonstrate that now. Click defaults, yes to the reset, click OK, and now you can see we're back to the defaults of the program. The client display is the screen you see when opening the program. This view can be modified by adding or removing columns or by moving these columns around. This is a good time to mention the different views that are available for the client list. On the left of the client list is a section called Views. My view is currently set to all clients. These views were created to filter the client list. For example, the eFile clients and the eFile Center views will only show clients that have been marked for eFile. Tax import clients will only show the clients that have been selected for the tax import feature, and eOrg clients will show the details of the electronic organizer statuses. Each of these views can be modified in the Display tab of the options. Let's open the Options window to the Display tab. To modify a view, use this drop-down to select the view you'd like to modify. I'm going to select All Clients. On the left is a list of all of the items available to be displayed. I'm going to expand all of these items so that we can look at them. As you look through these items, you may notice that nearly all of the data entry fields where data can be entered in the client file are listed here for display. Now I'm going to collapse this list. I'm going to add a couple of items. One item I'm going to add is under the client information, so I'm going to expand that by using the plus sign. I'm going to use this scroll bar to drag this down, and I'm going to add the taxpayer home telephone number. Now there's two ways to get this over to the right display field over there. You can either highlight it and push the right arrow here, or you can double click on that item to move it over to the right. I'm just going to double click this. The other thing I'm going to add here is the AGI. Expand that here, highlight adjusted gross income, and then push this arrow here to move it over to the right. So now I'm going to click OK so we can see the results of that. So here we see the two columns that I've added. It's as simple as that. Not only can you add columns to the display, but these columns can also be moved left to right. Let's get into the options to see how to do that. So one way to move the items selected for display is move these items up or down in this list. The top is on the left and the bottom would be to the right. So let's move the AGI to the left by highlighting this AGI and selecting up. I'm going to move that over here to just underneath taxpayer's social security number. Let's click OK and take a look at that now. Now we can see that column is moved to the left. Well, that's really the hard way to move these columns. The easy way to move these columns is to drag and drop. So let's say I want to move this taxpayer's home phone number all the way to the left, just to the right of where it says full name. I'm going to click down and then drag that column over here and then release it on top of client number. And you can see now that's moved that column over there. That's the quick, easy way to move these columns around. To remind you of something I said earlier, each of these views shown on the left can be modified in the same fashion. Select the view that you want to modify from the drop-down list and add or remove these columns as needed. One last area to look at on the display options has these two checkboxes: automatically adjust column widths and left column fixed. The automatically adjust column widths means that the program will try to show all of the columns on the screen without the need to scroll. To demonstrate this functionality, I've added a handful of additional columns to the display. I've also left the automatically adjust box unchecked. Let's look at the client display. So now across the bottom I have this scroll bar, and I can use this scroll bar, push it off to the right, and I can see all those additional columns that I've selected. Let's go back into the options and check that box. Now this view's changed to include these other columns, and there's no longer a scroll bar at the bottom. The downside of this function is that some of these columns now don't show the entire entry that's in that column. You'll just need to be aware of this when you make these changes to your display options. The last option to look at is the left column fixed checkbox. Let's check that box and look at the results. With that option selected, when I scroll this display off to the right, the far left column is fixed in place. This will allow you to still see the client name while you're scrolling through these different columns. Lastly, I want to explain this defaults button. This default button will change the entire tab back to the defaults, not just the view selected in the client view dropdown. This defaults button will reset all of these views back to the default, so whatever changes I've made on any of these different options will be reset to the default display options. Well, that's it for this training video. You should now be able to manage the display of the client list and understand how to use the fonts and colors. Thank you for taking the time to learn about fonts and colors and the display options.